Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. Keep up with the latest dinosaur discoveries and science with us. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Sabrina.
And today in our 494th episode, we're doing a revisited episode of our fourth ever episode.
Yes, this included our third interview ever with paleontologist Phil Currie, which we were a bit starstruck, especially when we met him and his wife and paleobotanist Eva Kupelhuis a few months later at SVP. Though at the time, I don't think I fully appreciated just how big a deal this was.
Doing the interview,
yeah, because he's so down to earth and it was so fun to talk to him. But he helped found the Royal Tyrrell Museum. He's a professor. He helped describe some of the first feathered dinosaurs. He's an expert in theropods, origin of birds, dinosaur migration patterns. He's named over 20 dinosaurs. He teaches the online course Dino 101, which we recommend to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just to name a few of his accolades, because now he has a museum named after him, the Philip J. Currie Museum, which we've been to, and we also recommend going if you can swing it.
Yeah, that opened years after we did this interview, but also years ago, because this interview was almost 10 years ago now.
Yes.
And that museum is way north in Alberta, Canada. So it is a little bit out of the way, but they built it specifically because there was a really good site nearby where they were digging up a lot of fossils. And it was basically like, this would be a great place to have a museum. We could do the collecting. Maybe we could even do some prep work here. Be so much easier than having to ship it hundreds, maybe even 1,000 miles away in order to get that stuff going.
And Phil Currie goes there and does field work out there, because that was another time we ran into him. It was him and the paleontologist Xu Xing and a bunch of other big name paleontologists there. And we had taken a tour of the museum and done some interviews, and we're talking to the people who work there, and they said, oh, you know who's here? You could just go up the road to see them digging. So we did, and it was early days of the podcast. So we're like, oh, we have no business being here. And we kind of sidled up to him like, oh, can we take a picture?
Yeah. We recorded a little bit of field audio too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fun. And it was funny too, the way they directed us to that site too, because basically they said, we'll go up this dirt road, turn, and then like around this certain curve, you'll see a fence and just park there. There should be other cars, and then just like walk. So when we were walking up, we had no idea if we were in the right place. But fortunately we weren't. We weren't like trespassing on some random person's land.
Right, because it was just us and the people doing field work at this site.
Yeah, it was really interesting too, because like Sabrina said, usually when you have a dig site, it's like you have one famous paleontologist, maybe two, and they'll have a crew of volunteers from, different undergrad programs or graduate school programs, maybe some post-grad people. The ratio of expert PhD with decades of experience to younger, able-bodied people that can dig up a whole bunch of stuff but don't have as much experience is usually pretty high. There's usually a lot of these younger people. But this one, it was just like a weird all-star cast of experts with very few people that didn't have PhDs there. It was really interesting. And they were in a very small spot too, because they were digging up, I think, they were digging up some sort of ceratopsian skulls, and there were all these little pieces, but it was a bone bed with multiple individuals. So they were trying not to mess them up by digging around one fossil too much. So they're being very careful.
Yeah. So again, I really appreciate the time that Phil Currie took to chat with me and answer all my questions. It did take a little while to organize this particular interview, because before we recorded, he had recently spent 6 weeks in Antarctica, which is so cool, literally.
They don't have great internet there, so I had to wait till he got back. Plus, he was busy.
Yeah. If you're in Antarctica, I don't expect you to be doing anything else but your primary purpose of going to Antarctica.
And when you go, it's the summer there, and the sun basically doesn't set. So there's very few restrictions on how much time you can spend out digging up fossils.
Yes. And if I remember correctly, we did this interview through Skype, because this was, again, years ago, before Zoom was big. And it felt almost like a casual hangout, other than me being a bit nervous.
Yeah, you did the interview totally solo. And I think you did a great job. I just re-listened to it, and I enjoyed it.
Thank you. But yes, it does need a little remastering, because, again, it was a Skype recording.
Yeah.
We also covered Dinosaur of the Day, Tarbosaurus, in this episode, which we probably need to revisit that one at some point. Again, this was early days, so we didn't dive quite as deep. Didn't go down that Eryctodromaeus burrow. just kind of poked our heads in, I would say.
Yeah, and we were saying it, especially me. I was saying Tarbosaurus very weird. I was saying like Tarbosaurus or something the whole
Oh,
time.
really?
I don't know why or where that came from, but Tarbosaurus is the preferred way to say it, I would say.
Yeah, early days. So we hope you enjoy this remastered version of a now classic episode.
Yes. But before we do that, we do have to thank some patrons for helping us to keep our podcast going and enabling us to remaster episodes. And this week we have 3 new patrons to thank. They are Amber, Dinosuchus, and Eodit. Thank you all very much for joining. And then rounding out our shoutouts, we've got Danny Hermes, Lorasaurus, Steph, the Howard family, Reed, Travis, and John.
Yes, thank you so much for being a Dino It All and being part of our community.
Yes, way back when we first recorded this episode, we had very few listeners and we didn't have a community to speak of. And it's so cool now to see how the show has grown and how our community has grown. And it's just great to have everybody involved. And we love the Dinosaur of the Day requests and the questions and everything that comes out of the community. So without further ado, we'll get on to our interview with Phil Currie.
So with us today, we have Dr. Philip John Currie from the University of Alberta. Dr. Currie has named 25 new dinosaurs and had 3 named in his honor. He's also famous for a Centrosaurus bone bed, hadrosaur nesting sites, and the Canada-China Dinosaur Project, and he has written numerous books. He started working at the Royal Alberta Museum in 1976, then the Provincial Museum of Alberta, and found so many dinosaur bones the museum ran out of storage space. In 1979, he wrote the proposal for what is now the Tyrrell Museum, which showcases Alberta's dinosaurs and has lab facilities, a study center, and massive storage space. In 2005, he took up the Canada Research Chair at the University of Alberta so he could spend more time in the field. He also teaches the online class Dino 101, which goes over dinosaur appearances and major groups, how fossils are formed and interpreted, how dinosaurs lived, dinosaur origins, dinosaur extinction, and more. So thank you for speaking with me today.
You're very welcome.
First, how did you become interested in paleontology?
It's an interesting story because actually I was one of those kids who liked dinosaurs from the time I was 6 years old. And for me, it was a box of cereal with a plastic dinosaur in it. And that got me hooked. But by the time I was 11, I'd read a book called All About Dinosaurs by Roy Chapman Andrews. Andrews' book was really about what it was like to be a paleontologist or a scientist in the field. And the day I read the book was the day I decided I was going to be a dinosaur paleontologist, period, full stop.
That's great. And I know you've done field work in Alberta, Antarctica, the Arctic, Argentina, British Columbia, China, Mongolia. What brings you to those places and what specifically do you look for at those sites?
Usually it's an invitation that will take me to a different place. But in some cases, of course, we want to work there. So, for example, in Mongolia and China, specifically in the Gobi Desert of both countries, the rocks are about the same age as the rocks here in Alberta, and the dinosaurs are very closely related to the ones in Alberta. The difference is that the dinosaurs are preserved in a slightly different way, so even though we're looking at the same dinosaurs, basically, they're preserved differently, and so they give different information. So for me to get information about Alberta dinosaurs, I had to go work in the Gobi Desert, essentially, to understand what was going on there so I could better understand what was going on here. And it's been a very successful program that way.
So what are some of the differences in how it's preserved?
Well, for example, in Alberta, there's a tendency for the large animals to be very well preserved, but the small animals tend to be very spotty, we'll say. And the reason is, of course, you have tyrannosaurs running around, and tyrannosaurs, if they found anything at all, living or dead, they would eat it. And if you happen to be small, there wasn't much left. Secondly, I think that the environment was such that the rivers were quite strong, and they would cut into the riverbanks and undercut skeletons and rework the bones and so on. And if you happen to be a big animal and the bones are heavy, they'll just fall to the bottom of the stream and then get buried there. They'll stay more or less in association. But the small ones, they get busted up pretty badly by the river and washed downstream. So it's not that the bones aren't there, it's just that the skeletons aren't there. So that's kind of a normal preservation here in Alberta. Small dinosaurs are very rare. And in the case of Mongolia, it's almost the opposite. What happens is that the environment was slightly different. It was a semi-arid to arid environment. Very often the small specimens got buried in sand dunes rather than in rivers. And as a consequence of that, these skeletons tended to stay together. So if we wanted to look at the anatomy of a dromaeosaur here in Alberta, dromaeosaurs include Velociraptor. We've never found a complete one in Alberta before. But if you go to Mongolia, then of course you can see a complete specimen of Velociraptor. Then you can understand what all the skeletal bones look like. And then you can come back to Alberta and then identify all those isolated bones that we have, which are very hard to identify otherwise. Never seen them before.
Interesting. Is Mongolia kind of the best place to go for you in terms of excavations, or is it your favorite?
After Alberta, Alberta is my favorite because it's in my backyard, and I can go outside and I can collect dinosaurs actually less than 10 kilometers from here. And theoretically, I should be able to find them about 100 meters from here. But the reality is that when we compare to other areas, Mongolia has a different kind of preservation, as I mentioned, but you get a lot of big skeletons preserved too. And the thing is, you can almost go out every day in Mongolia and find a new dinosaur skeleton. Here it takes a little bit more time to do that. We have more bones overall, but skeletons, they have more skeletons. So it's a good balance.
Now I'm just going to jump in here for a second to take a quick ad break, but I want to say that Sabrina is doing a fantastic job, and especially for our third ever interview. So after a quick word from our sponsor, we'll get right back to the interview.
So I read Dino Games book, and just really quick, it mentioned your wife Eva is a paleobotanist and paleontologist. So you work very closely together. Does she go on all the digs with you and everything?
Yeah, Eva gets to come on all the digs with me, which is fantastic. It's certainly good to have a different perspective when you're looking at fossil resources because, the reality is you're interested in all fossils. Even though I may specialize in theropod dinosaurs, I do work on anything that I find, essentially, because it's all interesting and it's all useful for somebody in terms of trying to figure out maybe the depositional environments or the ecosystem or whatever. And in her case, because she works on fossil plants and pollen and spores are very good actually for identifying the level that these bones come from. In other words, what age they are. And consequently, she has a different perspective, and that helps. The other good thing for me, though, is that it doesn't take her very long to collect her specimens, and then she has to help me.
Your area of expertise includes theropods, origin of birds, dinosaur migration patterns, and herding behavior. What led you to focus on these things?
Well, I'm very interested in sort of the biology of dinosaurs in general, and for the theropod dinosaurs, it's kind of a natural, the classic dinosaur I really wanted when I was a kid was Tyrannosaurus rex, and we get Tyrannosaurus rex here, so it's something I can go and find, but also the relatives of Tyrannosaurus rex. The origin of birds came in kind of sideways because I never thought I could ever say anything about the origin of birds initially, simply because beds in Alberta are Cretaceous in age. They're probably 30 or 40 million years after birds first appeared. So they're too late in time, really, one would think, to tell you much about the origin of birds. But in fact, they ended up taking a very interesting twist because some of the small meat-eating dinosaurs here, things like Troodon and Dromaeosaurus, these are very bird-like in a lot of ways. And when I was educated at university, main ideas were that birds probably did not come from dinosaurs. Birds probably came from crocodiles or pecodonts or maybe some other group. But the more I looked at these meat-eating dinosaurs from the late Cretaceous, the more I realized how bird-like they were, including to very, very small details, such as the placement of nerves and holes in the skull that you wouldn't expect unless there was some kind of relationship. Also, because of our work in China, we had contacts there, and I ended up being invited to work on several of the species of feathered dinosaurs in China. And this has come around full circle now because we're finding feathered dinosaurs here in Alberta. Even though they're late Cretaceous in age, they're theropod dinosaurs, and they are very bird-like. And there's a lot we can learn about, say, the structure and evolution of feathers by looking at our late Cretaceous feathers as well.
I also read you worked with computer models to learn more about dinosaurs, and I know I took the class Dino 101, and I saw it had a few interactive elements, which was really cool. Do they help to shed light on dinosaur behavior?
Well, computer modeling is kind of thing that you don't expect dinosaur people to do, right? But the beauty of it is that dinosaur bones very often are very heavy, they're massive, they're fragile, they're very hard to handle in your hands, so you can't manipulate things all that easy. I mean, it's not like we don't have ways to do it. We can cast them and turn them into light plastic and then play with them that way. But it's a lot easier just to scan specimens or CT scan specimens and then digitize them on a computer and then be able to manipulate the bones. And very often it doesn't tell you exactly what the dinosaur was doing with its, say, leg bones, but what it does give you is a range of possibilities. So it shows how far they could stretch their legs, for example, or how far they could fold their legs up, and that'll give you some information. And then you work on the premise that somewhere in between is probably the reality. And once you do enough of this kind of work, things start to fall together and start to constrain each other, each one of these models that we do. And consequently, you do end up with, I think, a pretty realistic idea of what the animals were capable of. Certainly, it's a good way to do, say, limb models or biomechanics, where we're looking at, say, how the jaws closed and how they chewed things. But the CT scans and the computer modeling also help us with internal anatomy. So, for example, the brain case of a dinosaur, we can CT scan a skull. It doesn't show the brain cavity itself. But from the CT scans, we can then get the information on the brain cavity, and then we can see where the nerves were running, and that helps us interpret how the animal was living, how they were interacting, what they were capable of, and all those things. So it's pretty amazing what computer modeling has done for paleontology over the last 20 years in particular. And as I said, it's very often we can't get a definite answer, but we can approach much closer to reality by doing the modeling.
Mm-hmm. So do you use this technique a lot now?
Well, I'm still an old-style paleontologist where I prefer to go in the field and collect things, do the preparation and do the description. And I do some computer modeling, and I work with computer models, but it's something that we've made sure that our students understand better because it's becoming progressively more important for them to be able to do that. You know, at this stage, I would say there are quite a few dinosaurs that we have the digitized information on skeletons for. And, of course, we can make that information available to other researchers anywhere in the world. But we still don't have everything available. And as time goes on and more of these digitized skeletons become available to people to work with, then of course it's going to become progressively more important for their work. So we make sure our students understand the stuff very well, and they do a lot of computer modeling, as well as, of course, we still drag them into the field and make them find specimens, collect them, and do the basic research on them, and because that's also very important to us.
So I just wanted to bring up Dino 101 a little bit, and it's a free course open to anyone who wants to join, no prerequisites. And after reading the book Dino Gangs, I got the sense that you're very open and inviting with your work. So what made you decide to create this course?
Well, I can't take credit for it because it was the Dean of Science at the University of Alberta who first brought it to our attention that we could do this kind of thing. And of course, my first question was, well, what's a MOOC? A massive online open course. And I had no idea. It always seemed to me that this was an important way that the science was going because so many people are interested in dinosaurs, and I get contacted all the time by emails or letters or people phoning or showing up in my office or whatever. So there's no question that the appetite is out there. And it seemed to me that this was a new area for teaching. And What we wanted to do was make sure that it was also something we could incorporate into the university system. So out of Dino 101, we also have 2 courses at the university, one which is called Paleo 200, and the other one which is called Paleo 201. 200 is just the Dino 101 course, essentially, except people pay tuitions and they take exams and they get graded on it. 201 goes beyond that, where we have field trips, special lectures, and so on. So it supplements the basic course itself. What we wanted to do, of course, is in the university see if, in fact, we could turn this course into a basic introductory course so that people could move on from the introductory course into other courses in paleontology. And I wasn't sure how that was going to work. I wasn't sure how it was going to work to the general public as Dino 101 either. It's just one of those things that you take a chance on and you believe in that, there's tremendous potential to it, but whether or not you'll ever realize that potential is another matter. I would have to say it's succeeded on all levels. That, we've had close to 50,000 students now with Dino 101. It has the best record for people completing the course, because a lot of people, of course, they sample food courses, but they don't actually complete them. And also, there are a lot of statistics that are quite interesting. People tend to think that it's little boys who like dinosaurs, but the reality is that we've had, in fact, had more girls than boys take the course. So it's quite interesting that way too. It really was something that we thought probably would work, but we had no idea how it was going to work. And it's been great education for me to see that even though the course was really aimed at being for a first-year university student or higher level high school students, in reality, we've had people as young as 6 years old go through the course, and with the help of their parents for some of the things, they managed to do very well. And so it takes the lid off what you think you can do. And our oldest student, I think, was well into her 80s. So it's reached a lot of people and taught us a lot about education as well.
Oh, yeah. It's a big range. How often does the course run?
We run the course twice a year right now. And so it'll start in September, and then it'll start again in January most years. That's been the pattern so far. We may up to 3 times a year. We're not really sure yet. We're in fact in the process of developing another level of the course per se, which we're tentatively calling Dino 102. And that'll be more specialized than Dino 101. So, for example, I'll spend a lot of time talking about the origin of birds from theropod dinosaurs. So we'll see how that goes too.
Well, I'll tell you now, I'll take that class.
Good.
So there's a lot of interactive elements in Dino 101. We've got videos, lessons, images, but there's the 3D fossil exploring environment where you rank bones online, and the interactive timeline that talks about the different ages on Earth. How did you and your team come up with these elements?
Well, we have a lot of creative thinkers at the university, needless to say, including our own graduate students who work in paleontology. Everybody's got different experiences and different ways of approaching things. And so fundamentally, this has been a team effort where we sit down and we brainstorm and come up with ideas. And some of the ideas don't work as well as we'd like them to, and we replace them with other ideas and so on. But, the interactive museum idea in particular I really like, because it's something we're doing anyway. I mean, we're taking these bones and we are, as I mentioned, digitizing them, and we're using them for computer modeling. And so one of the real disadvantages, of course, with an online course is that people can't handle the actual bones. They can't go to a laboratory and pick them up and look at these fossils. But by doing the digitized models online, then of course it does give people an opportunity to in fact see these things from all sides. Even though it's a computer model, nevertheless, it's the same kind of thing that we would work on when we're doing computer modeling. So there's something to be learned from that. Some of these things have really worked very well for us. Other ones, well, we're still looking at new ideas, new ways of doing it.
According to Dino Gangs, you are a dino hunter. What does that mean?
Dino hunters are people who go hunt fossils, of course. And in my case, I'm specifically looking for dinosaurs. Whether I'm hunting dinosaurs in my home city of Edmonton or whether I'm, in fact, working in Antarctica or the Arctic, there's a lot of work involved in going out and finding dinosaur bones. They don't just suddenly appear in front of you, or you can't walk right up to them and there they are. In most cases, what you have to do is spend a lot of time walking and hunting. And so, for example, a normal day in Dinosaur Provincial Park would be for us to get up early in the morning and start walking and walk all day for fossils. We'll find fossils all the time, but in terms of important fossils, things that are really unique, you have to walk a long, long time. So on average, in spite of the fact that Dinosaur Park has produced more than 800 skeletons over the years, when you look at the amount of manpower that's put in finding those 800 skeletons, it works out to about 4 man weeks for each one. So 4 man weeks means that you're walking 4 weeks without finding anything else. It's not quite that simple, of course, but it still shows you that there is, in fact, a lot of work involved in finding things. We go to other places like the Arctic and the Antarctic. Sometimes we're walking up to 12 or 16 hours a day and you don't find a single scrap of bone of anything. Yet, at the end of the expedition, you may have found something that is only a single bone, which in Alberta, frankly, we would probably ignore because it's not that important. But in the Arctic or the Antarctic, that's an identifiable bone that tells you what animals were in fact living in that area, and it becomes a very important specimen. And you put a lot of effort into finding it or hunting for it.
Right. So in Antarctica and the Arctic, did you set off on those expeditions expecting to find something, or do you have like a tip or something? How did you end up there?
The Arctic was no tip. We knew that the dinosaur bones had been found in some cases before. These are just isolated bones that were found fortuitously by, say, a geologist or somebody doing biology on polar bears or whatever. So the Arctic, we didn't have any clues other than the fact that we knew the rocks were the right age and the potential was there for finding dinosaur bones. That was an interesting story because we went up there first in 1986 and we looked and looked and looked and we didn't get anything yet after something like 6 weeks. And the following year, there was an Inuit boy out there with a geologist, and he found a dinosaur bone. And of course, once he found it, then we knew, okay, the area he was maybe a couple hundred kilometers away from where we were. So we went back again in 89, went to the place where he found those bones, and that initial bone, and we found lots more dinosaur bones there. So, you always have to take a chance sometimes for these sites. Antarctica was a little bit different, though, because in 1990, a geologist was basically measuring section or figuring out the rocks on a mountainside in pretty much the center of Antarctica. And he found dinosaur bones at that time. So in 1990, the specimen was found. It was partly excavated, but of course the conditions there are very difficult and it's very expensive to work there. So we were able to go with a party in something like 13 years after the specimen was found initially to try and collect the rest of the skeleton. And that was an absolutely amazing experience. We were working 600 kilometers from the South Pole and 4,000 meters above 11,000 feet above sea level. And so it was cold. But we got another part of the skeleton, but another third of the skeleton out. And we finally went back in 2010 and finished the job finally. And in the process of doing that, we got to look around a little bit. We found several more dinosaur skeletons in the same area. So it was a matter of getting to the area first. Once we were in the area, then we started to get better luck and get better specimens. So it's always this combination of things. Sometimes you're very lucky, and maybe somebody from the general public is out and walking their dog. Case one site in Edmonton here, and just happened to find a dinosaur bone. And brings it to our attention, and we realize that, well, maybe this is a cool site. So we go and check it. Sure enough.
In the book, it sounded like your focus is on carnivores and specifically Tarbosaurus batar. Okay.
Tarbosaurus batar is, in fact, a dinosaur that's very closely related to Tyrannosaurus rex. Here in Alberta, we have another one called Spletosaurus. And the three animals form this little subfamily group that each one of them is very closely related to each other. Tarbosaurus is a very interesting one. It's found in the Gobi Desert. And where it's found, it's a dominant animal. It's the most common dinosaur we find there. That doesn't make any sense, because when you think about it, you can't have more lions than antelope. Basically, they have to eat, and if they have to eat, there has to be enough food for them. So normally what happens is the carnivores only make up about 5% of any fauna. And that's true here in, say, Alberta, where most of our tyrannosaurs are pretty rare animals. There's only one of those for every 20 or so plant-eating dinosaurs. But in Mongolia, it's 50-50. And it doesn't really compute. Something else is going on there. So it's a very interesting problem to try and figure out why we get so many Tarbosaurus skeletons in Mongolia. We're talking maybe between 70 and 100 skeletons now that we know of from Mongolia. And that's the same number that we have of duck-billed dinosaurs and horned dinosaurs and armored dinosaurs and so on. All those animals put together only make up the same thing, the same amount as the Tarbosaurus. We know it's got something to do with some kind of preservational bias. So there's something selectively preserving more Tarbosaurus than anything else. And we know that because the same beds also produce footprints. And the footprint sites are very different because even though they're interspersed with where we find the skeletons, when we look at the number of footprints, Tarbosaurus is only about 5% of the animals. So the footprints are telling us this is a normal ecosystem. The skeletons are telling us this is not normal. And we have a few ideas. For example, it's quite possible that Tarbosaurus was a very effective carnivore that just ate just about everything there was to eat of any animals. That didn't leave much evidence of the plant-eating dinosaurs that it was eating. We know that Tarbosaurus, like Tyrannosaurus rex, had these massive teeth and bone-crunching jaws that were probably unbelievable in terms of what they could do and process. And we had a very interesting trip many years ago to Komodo National Park in Indonesia. We looked at Komodo dragons and how they functioned. And we witnessed, in one case, a large pig, wild boar, about the same size as the Komodo dragon, which was eaten by 9 Komodo dragons who completely dismembered it, ate it, everything, absolutely everything, even the hair. Completely gone in less than 20 minutes.
Wow.
And there was nothing left, nothing but the smell. But it was great education too. So I never realized that Komodo dragons could do that kind of thing. And they don't have the kind of teeth that, say, something like Tarbosaurus had. Tarbosaurus had teeth that really were as well adapted as, say, a hyena is today in terms of eating animals. So that's certainly one possibility for explaining it. The only thing is, okay, well, why does it happen there, and why doesn't it happen here? Why isn't Tyrannosaurus rex doing the same thing? So, these little puzzles are very interesting, and it's fun to develop a theory or a hypothesis, and then go out and see if you can find evidence to support it or refute it. And that's a big part of our fun. I mean, basically, paleontologists are detectives. We're looking at these crime scenes that are 60 or 100 million years old, and we're trying to figure out what happened. And it's a lot of fun. It's a great mental process trying to work these things out, as well as working with fascinating animals all by themselves.
So I know one of your theories is that dinosaurs may have lived in gangs. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. And in Alberta here, we have these fantastic sites all over the province, in fact, where we don't find whole skeletons per se. What we find are what's called bone beds. And in the bone beds, we have the remains of many individuals where all the bones have fallen apart. Essentially, the skeletons have fallen apart and the bones have become mixed together. So you sometimes can't tell which bones belong to which individuals. However, some of these bone beds are dominated by single species of animals. And I started working on this in the 1970s and realized that almost certainly what I put all my time into at that time was a ceratopsian bone bed where more than 70 ceratopsian or horned dinosaurs had died in the same place at the same time. And the only way in the end to explain this was that these animals were living together at the time of their death, and they were probably living together up to the time of their death. And this implied that these animals, in fact, had social structure. We've now had a tremendous amount of evidence about these horned dinosaurs traveling in herds. We have herds in Dinosaur Park now that seem to represent mass death sites of thousands of animals. And in other parts of the world, like Montana, we now know that duck-billed dinosaurs, in fact, also have sites, which strongly suggests these animals were moving in very large herds as well. Alaska as well has evidence of herds. Here in Edmonton, 10 kilometers from my house, we have a herd of Edmontosaurus, one of the big duck-billed dinosaurs, and so on and so on. So we know, I think we're pretty sure that the plant-eating dinosaurs by the late Cretaceous were, in fact, herding animals and probably migrating animals as well. Now, the thing is that if you look at a modern ecosystem where you have large herds of herbivores, you almost invariably have packs of carnivores as well. And that's because the herbivores are ganging together in part so that they can protect themselves from the carnivores. And that's good for the herbivores. It's not good for the carnivores. The carnivores need to eat. So basically, they develop social structures as well. So if you go on the African belt, for example, lions, which are very closely related to tigers, lions have very specific social structures. And that's because they move in groups or prides or family groups, and they hunt together. And they're going after, of course, herds of antelope, herds of zebra, herds of other things. So there's a strong association between herds and packs, or herds and prides. Same thing in North America with herds of caribou and packs of wolves, for example. You always see these kind of things. Now, for a long time in dinosaurs, we knew that we have these enormous herds of duck-billed dinosaurs and enormous herds of horned dinosaurs, but we didn't have any evidence for the carnivores doing the same thing. But a curious thing happened in that when I was doing some museum searching at one point, I found out that in 1910, Barnum Brown, who on his very first expedition to collect dinosaurs in Alberta, found a site where there were all these tyrannosaurs that were living together or had died together. And he had parts of 9 skeletons of the Tyrannosaur Albertosaurus from one single place. And that got me pretty excited. So we dug out what evidence we could to help us refine the site. And there was a photograph, luckily. And that one photograph, in the end, led to the discovery of the site that Brown had excavated in 1910. Well, Brown had only excavated part of the skeleton. And he, in fact, had left a lot of it in the ground still. So we took the number from 9 animals to more than 20 animals in the one bone bed. And this is a place where we have tyrannosaurs and we have a few duck-billed dinosaur bones. But they seem to be almost ancillary. They're just there by accident. They were washed in by the river, and they're not articulated animals. So suddenly we had this evidence to suggest that at least some tyrannosaurs moved together in packs. And we started looking at other tyrannosaur sites to see if, in fact, there was evidence that other tyrannosaurs were doing the same thing as Albertosaurus. And Tarbosaurus in Mongolia, one of the reasons we may have so many animals there And why they outnumber all the plant-eating dinosaurs as well is because maybe these things, in fact, were also moving in packs, and that what we're finding in Mongolia are remnants of these packs that got trapped by some natural process and killed multiple individuals of them. So right now, I think I feel pretty strongly about the fact that we have packs of meat-eating dinosaurs that, in fact, are hunting the herds of plant-eating dinosaurs.
Is that a widely accepted theory?
Well, it's very interesting because, of course, when we first proposed that we had a herd of horned dinosaurs, everybody was very much against that. Everybody assumed that dinosaurs were just typical reptiles, and reptiles today don't usually move in any kind of social groupings. So there was a lot of resistance to that initially, but the thing is that we got so much evidence. There were so many places in Alberta where we had these herds of horned dinosaurs, or between Montana and Alberta where we had these herds of duck-billed dinosaurs. And subsequent to that, of course, we found lots of sites that are footprint sites where we have other types of dinosaurs too, including the giant sauropods moving in groups. So the evidence eventually became so overwhelming that I think the majority of people accepted it just by this tidal wave of information that was being collected worldwide. With carnivores, you're dealing with animals that are much rarer, and consequently, you have a much lower chance of finding groupings like this. But now we have quite a few sites that are doing the same kind of thing. So I'd say the idea is new enough that there's still quite a bit of resistance to the idea. But I think as time goes on, people look into it more and try and prove or disprove it. It doesn't matter which. You do, in fact, collect evidence that's going to show what reality was, right? Mm-hmm. And right now, I would say that the shift is coming towards people accepting more the idea that these animals did move in groups.
So I know you've collaborated, such as with the Korea-Mongolia International Dinosaur Project. Do you find that you learn more from working in teams or more on your own? What do you prefer?
I kind of like both, but the reality is with small projects, you can do those by yourself. But when you're dealing with something that potentially has a tremendous amount of information that you get together, or where you need different kinds of sciences or different or people with different kinds of expertise to work together, then the larger projects work better as teams. Paleontology, like I think all of the sciences, has become much more multidisciplinary and multinational over the years. And we find that, we still may do individual projects, but in fact, that for the majority of the projects that we're working with, if you want to make some true breakthroughs, then it's really good to work together as a group. There's really advantages in that.
If you have a wish list of finds, what would be at the top of it?
Oh, my wish list would probably be Troodon. Troodon's was first found in 1854, if you believe it, a single tooth in Montana. And for a long time, we had no idea what Troodon was. It was a small theropod dinosaur. For some people, for other people, it was a lizard. For other people, it was a plant-eating dinosaur. We really had no idea. But in the 1980s, we in fact found a jaw here in Alberta, which proved that Troodon was a carnivorous dinosaur. It turned out to be another dinosaur that we had called Stenonychosaurus, which was the brainiest dinosaur we knew of. The largest known brain. This is an animal with a brain that, for its body size, is about 6 times the size of a crocodile with the same body size. It's an animal that had binocular vision, like us. It could see things on 3 dimensions. It had hands that could manipulate things. It had very long legs that were built for speed. It's a runner. And now we know from specimens in Mongolia and China that this is in fact a feathered dinosaur as well. And probably the dinosaur that's most closely related to birds. Now, the curious thing is that after all these years, we still find bits and pieces of this dinosaur, but we have never found a whole skeleton. And so for me, I would just love to find a whole skeleton, just to know that all the things we put together over the years, all the evidence, in fact, is correct.
My last question is, what advice would you give to budding paleontologists or people who are just enthusiastic about dinosaurs?
Well, of course, there's many ways to be enthusiastic about dinosaurs. There are many people who specialize in dinosaurs in different ways. And of course, not everybody likes to do research. Not everybody likes to do field work. Not everybody likes to work in the dusty collections of an old museum. Some people like to do things on computer modeling and everything. There's just so many ways you can work on dinosaurs. And, if you want to become a research paleontologist, you really have to go the whole mile. You have to go through your schooling. You have to try and get a doctorate eventually. You have to publish research papers. You go to writing and illustration and finding things and all the rest of it. I mean, there's a lot of things involved. But there are also people who are like dinosaurs who only go as far as becoming, say, collections managers. They don't do much research. They're more interested in just handling and dealing with fossils themselves, or becoming technicians where they're doing preparation on dinosaurs. I love doing preparation, but I never have time to do preparation because I spend most of my time, of course, writing and things like that. There's other people who are in fact, artists who specialize in nothing but dinosaurs. There's 3 in Alberta alone who are world-famous artists who do nothing but work on dinosaurs. So there's many ways to skin the cat. And it's basically, you have to decide exactly what you want to get into and then find the way to do it, the mechanism to do it. In my case, it was a matter of, even as a high school student, I was going to people who were already paleontologists, asking them what I needed to do in terms of my coursework to get into university and specialize in dinosaurs eventually. In other cases, of course, if you're an artist and you want to do it that way, then you would approach art school and see what you can do that way. But the main thing is, don't be afraid to talk to people, because everybody in the field, whether you're a research scientist or an artist who specializes in dinosaurs, they're very willing to talk to people and see them develop their preference for a career.
And that's the end of the interview. It ended a little bit abruptly this time, but I think it was fantastic. Listening back to it, he touched on a lot of topics that we have covered quite a bit over the years, and it's fun to listen back and hear sort of the state of the science back about 10 years ago, which in most of the cases that we were discussing haven't really changed all that much. But yeah, thank you again to Phil Currie for that wonderful interview. And good job, Sabrina, conducting the interview.
Thank you.
And now we're going to pause for one last quick sponsor break, and then we'll get into our dinosaur of the day, Tarbosaurus, and not Tarbosaurus, or however we say it in this slightly awkward dinosaur of the day segment.
You can't even say it that way anymore.
Yeah. I'm glad you do the dinosaur of the day segments now. You're much better at them. The dinosaur of the day is Tarbosaurus. So Tarbosaurus was kind of the Asian counterpart of Tyrannosaurus rex, living in Asia about 70 million years ago in the late Cretaceous, just like T-Rex, except for the Asia part. He weighed up to 5 tons and had about 60 teeth. Tyrannosaurus, by comparison, Tyrannosaurus rex was about 6 tons, so just a little bit smaller. But they looked very similar. They both had the very small 2-fingered forelimbs and the big 3-toed hind legs. Tarbosaurus was also very long, 33 to 39 feet. Still not quite as long as T-Rex, but very long. The whole Tyrannosaurus family, the Tyrannosaurids, had a few things in common that are very interesting. So when they were a young family, before they evolved, they were not the apex predators. They were actually some of the smaller meat eaters. And Tyrannosaurids, or Tyrannosauridae, were one of the last groups to become very large in the dinosaur time frame. It took until about the last 20 million years of the dinosaur era to become their full size. And although they became the biggest meat eaters or some of the biggest meat eaters that we saw in that era, they all had proportionally large skulls and strong necks compared to other dinosaurs. So most dinosaurs had sharp teeth for cutting through meat, but the tyrannosaurids had very large, powerful teeth and necks so they could do more ripping. And there's even a theory that Tyrannosaurus rex and maybe Tarbosaurus would grab onto the frill of a Triceratops and rip its head off of its body, and then it could get at the neck meat, which is pretty horrifying. But it shows just how powerful its neck was. And part of the theory about why its arms are so small is that its skull weighed so much that if it had large arms, it would topple over forward. So evolving smaller arms allowed its head to get bigger, and then it has that big bulky tail also to counterbalance it.
So living in the late Cretaceous, Tarbosaurus was one of the last dinosaurs, at least non-avian dinosaurs. And as we discussed, they were large, but they were not that heavy. They actually had a pretty lightweight skeleton. One interesting fact is that Tarbosaurus was actually more ancient than T-Rex, which suggests that the genus could have initially appeared in Asia and then they entered North America through a land bridge that connected the continents in the Cretaceous period.
To go along with the theory of the Tarbosaurus hunting in packs, there's an interesting phenomenon that may have existed, which is that the young Tarbosaurs and other tyrannosaurids may have been faster than the adults. So they put on a lot of weight in their version of puberty, I guess. They became full-grown adults at around 20 years old. But before that, they were pretty lean and very fast. They had a longer shin bone than upper leg bone, which across the animal kingdom is correlated to sprinting ability. So if you have a longer lower leg, you can typically run faster than if you have a longer upper leg. And as the tyrannosaurids grew up, the shin bone got shorter relative to the upper leg. And along with the additional weight, they may not have been able to move as quickly. And you can tell that through some of the ichnology on the tracks. Depending on how far apart they are and how they look, you can estimate how fast they could move. So to go along with the hunting in packs, it's possible that the young, faster tyrannosaurids, or Tarbosauruses in this case, would chase another dinosaur into either get tired or towards the larger members of the group. And then with their big, powerful jaws and strong neck muscles, they could take down whatever the younger ones were chasing. So I know I've seen documentaries where they show lions doing this. You'll see the female lions chasing them around, and at the end of the hunt, they chase them into an ambush, and they all pounce. So could have been a similar behavior going on with the tyrannosaurs on a much larger scale. Now the fun fact of the day. Most dinosaurs were vegetarians, but the first dinosaurs were carnivores, according to the book Inside Dinosaurs. So now through May 7th, you can actually take the Dino 101, also known as Dinosaur Paleobiology course, put on by Dr. Currie at the University of Alberta. And to sign up for that course, you just go to www.coursera.org, and Coursera is Coursera, like a course with a ceratops. Except I'm sure that's not the purpose.
A couple of notes. The Dino 101 online course is still going. It currently has 4.9 stars and over 3,000 reviews on Coursera. We really can't recommend that course highly enough. It's totally free. It covers all of the fundamentals of dinosaurs. They've actually updated it so you can take it whenever you want. You don't have to wait for a session. Back then, they did it twice a year, so you kind of had to sign up, and then you could go along with some instruction, limited instruction, but there was a little bit of feedback back and forth. Now it's more open and a continuous enrollment situation.
Yeah, and if you want to sign up for that class, it's available on our new and improved resource pages at iknowdino.com/resources.
Oh, yeah. Or go to iknowdino.com and click resources at the top. And we really like that course specifically because it did help Sabrina and I get back into dinosaurs, remember all the terminology, how the different dinosaur groups are related, what some of the unique features of dinosaurs are compared to other animals. And so if you're ever listening to this podcast and you feel a little bit lost in some of the jargon we use, that course could be a great place to go. And it's really nice too to get the visuals because it can be pretty visual at times talking about animals, and it's something that unfortunately we can't really do with the podcast. So I definitely recommend checking out Dino 101 if you want to get a little bit more of that fundamental dinosaur stuff. I also wanted to update, Phil Currie mentioned that on his wish list was a Troodon because we only have bits and pieces, and obviously he considered it to be separate from Stenonychosaurus. It's still very up in the air whether or not Troodon is a valid genus. The holotype is still just a couple of teeth, so it's not a lot to go on. Depending who you ask, they think it's definitely dubious. Other people think it's definitely valid because they think those teeth are unique, or those other fragments that we have aren't close enough to Stenonychosaurus, so Troodon should be considered valid. It's still just pretty up in the air. After we interviewed Phil Currie, he also was on the naming of a new paper, which has been synonymized with Troodon, according to some people, and that's Latinovenatrix mcmasterae, which is often called Stenonychosaurus inequalis, depending on who you ask, because there's just pretty fragmentary bones we're working with, and it seems like they could be from the same genus. It just depends where you fall on the lumper versus splitter spectrum. How many differences do you want to see in order to call a new fossil a new dinosaur?
And that wraps up this remastered episode of I Know Dino. Stay tuned. Next week we'll be back with more new dinosaurs and new news. Plus, we talked to Tony and James Pinto about their documentary, Why Dinosaurs? Spoilers, you can watch it at a number of film festivals this summer.
Yeah, we'll tell you all about which film festivals they are going to, when they'll be there, all that good stuff.
Yes, so be sure to tune in, and if you want to stay up to date with all the latest dinosaur news, sign up for our newsletter. You can do that at iknowdino.com. Thanks again, and until next time.